I'm going to buy that keyboard, and you and I are going to start a rock band, and we're going to get all the ladies, and we're just going to have a great time.
Welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. Here's your host, Scott Cowan.
So my guest today is Raymond Hayden. Raymond, this is going to be a short intro. You are a keyboard player currently in the Tacoma area. I'm going to shut up and I'm going to ask you to tell our audience about you. Please.
Well, Scott, thanks for having me on your podcast. For sure. Definitely. I like long walks on the beach.
Okay.
I like chocolate truffles, and I'm a huge Pink Floyd fan.
Okay. Before you go on.
Okay.
Most underrated Pink Floyd album.
Saucer Full of Secrets.
Okay.
I think because it's my saxophone playing friends out there always give me shit about liking Pink Floyd so much, and when they do gigs with me, they just give me endless amount of shit, and I'm like, have you listened to Pink Floyd? Because I mean, when that guy comes out there, back in the day, I mean, he had a Barry sax on him, and then he had a tenor strapped around the backside. But to your question, underrated is, you hear people talking about, of course, Dark Side of Moon. You hear people talking about The Wall, Animals, Pipers at the Gates of Dawn, Division Bell, but you don't hardly ever hear anyone talk about Saucer Full of Secrets. And then the question you didn't ask, but is the one Pink Floyd album that I'm not particularly fond of, and that is Umagoomba. Okay.
But you left out one that most people don't leave out, and it's Wish You Were Here.
Oh, shoot. Yeah. It's funny. It's funny because most people, as you know, I have a podcast. I did a recent interview, and my guest, we talked about Pink Floyd, and his favorite album was Wish You Were Here. And, the song itself, I love. It's so beautiful. And I don't know why. I think probably because my mind is more, I'm more of a concept guy. Like, for example, if you ask me what my favorite Queensryche album was, I could name a lot of Queensryche songs that I love, but I would say Operation Mindcrime. Because I'm and that's probably why I leave Wish You Were Here out, because I really love the concept albums.
Okay. So all right. Well, so we already went off the rails and we've already hijacked this. So let's come back.
Let's come back.
Give us some of your background, please.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But you've got your job cut out for you today, my brother. So basically, okay, I'll give you the snapshot. So I started playing music at 9, and I wanted to be a drummer. And so I joined Drum and Bugle Corps, and I was all excited, and they said, yeah, we'd love to have you in. And I said, okay, I want to be a drummer. And so when I showed up to my first rehearsal, they handed me a pair of cymbals. And I was like, what the this isn't drums. And they're like, listen. And I learned that stupid cliche phrase, you got to walk before you run, son. And I hate that, but I've learned to embrace that because it's true. So I started out, I want to be a drummer, did the cymbals. I got bored real quick, ended up at one of our away camps, was on one of my friend's trumpets and was playing it, found out I had a knack for that. So I started playing trumpet. Throughout the years of junior high, elementary school, junior high, and high school, I ended up playing trumpet and jazz bands and pep band, French horn and concert band and honor band, baritone and Drum and Bugle Corps, touring all over the West Coast and Western Canada, and then even contrabass in marching band. And so did a lot of that. So obviously a lot of being involved in music. And when I wasn't doing that, I was like a camp counselor at church and stuff like this, but just do a lot of that stuff. Fast forwarding, I joined the Army in 1985 and went over to Europe. And a friend of mine, who to this day is still a friend of mine, Jane, we were sitting down having a drink, and I met her over there, and she said, hey, she found out I was a musician. She says, hey, I got a buddy of mine, this guy, James, they call him Rocket Rose, who's a guitar player. And right as she said that, he walks in. So she introduced us. We went down, we talked, got along swimmingly, went to the music center, which was right outside the post, right outside the barracks where I was stationed in Germany, and went down there. I rented a trumpet, He had his guitar. He was playing Eruption on the guitar, and I was playing, like Chameleon by Maynard Ferguson. Didn't really work out so well. And so as we were leaving, we laughed, and we were going to go get a beer. And as we were leaving, on the bulletin board, there was a Polaroid. For the young people out there, Polaroids were the old day instant pictures. And it was a picture of a Roland Juno 106, and it was on sale for $800. The cords, the keyboard, the case, blah, blah, blah. And I looked at it, and I looked at my buddy James Rocket Rose, and I said, I'm going to buy that keyboard, and you and I are going to start a rock band, and we're going to get all the ladies, and we're just going to have a great time. We went out that night, drank, and had a good time. The next morning, I woke up, and I was like, well, I got 3.5 years left in Germany. What the hell else am I going to do? So I went to the bank, got a loan, bought the keyboard, got lessons. Turns out the guy that I was taking lessons from was a major rock star. Him and I became best friends to this day, still are. He lives in Hamburg, Germany. And going forward, where we speed this up is I ended up, that band was my first band over in Europe called Ambition. Did a lot of classic rock and progressive rock. Moved back to the States. We toured. First we toured around Europe. Then we went to the States and East Coast, and well, that's when we imploded with different members of drugs, and for me it was alcohol and women. And moved back home to Tacoma, where my grandmother was ailing in health, so I was taking care of her and going to college, and different bands throughout the years, and just kept being a keyboard player. And and then over the course of things, ended up made friendships with different radio show hosts like Pat Cashman, and started did a little bit of some TV specials here and there, more bands, started putting out albums, ended up having my own record label, ended up starting a podcast. And then here we are, all these years later. And, I don't really define myself as a musician. I define myself as a connector and as a community person. And just one of the things I've done my whole life is music is something I've used to connect with people. That's about the quickest way I can kind of give you a snapshot of how I got to where I am now.
Well, that's awesome. My one question I have is, do you still have that original keyboard?
That's a great question. And I can tell you that the answer to that question is yes and no, because, Scott, I've learned, and listen, man, I'm just like anybody else. We, made mistakes and done whatever, but I've always tried to treat people well and just be myself. And no matter who you are, listen to you. And a really good buddy of mine, Terry Powers, just latched on to what I was doing musically and was such a big supporter. And when I put my last album out, my last full album, November 23rd of 2019, it was called Accidental Grace, and I dedicated it to him because he was such a big supporter. It's an all instrumental piano. And when I released that album, he invited me down to his house to smoke some cigars, drink some whiskey, whatever. And he said, I have something for you. Well, backing up for a second, that original keyboard I ended up selling in Germany, or in the East Coast. But it was a Roland Juno 106. Mm-hmm. When I went to Terry's house, we went into his garage, and he gave me, because he was a keyboard player too at one time, he gave me his keyboard, and it was a Roland Juno 106. So It's not the actual keyboard that I had in Germany, but it's the exact same model. And so I have it set up in my rig. And so, yeah, so it was kind of one of those full circle moments, but really cool.
So what are you currently, your rig? What are you currently, what are you playing with?
Well, not an accordion. But so I have 5 keyboards, and I've actually been toying around with the idea of changing my rig to a simpler setup, but just the different bands I've been playing with and whatever have led me to where I am now. So my main thing I do is piano. That's my main strength as a keyboard player. And so I have my main setup, I have a Yamaha CP300, which I use for predominantly piano. It's got one of the best piano sounds out there I've ever heard. And strings, some Rhodes, some Wurlitzer. On top of that, I have a Studio Logic Sledge, which is a sexy keyboard. It's black, and the keys that are normally white are black, and the keys that are normally black are gray. And that's a synthesizer. And it's got arpeggiators and all kinds of beautiful synth sounds, etc. And then on my right, on the bottom, I have a Nord Electro 3, which I predominantly use for organ. They're known for having an amazing organ sounds, almost comparable to Hammond's B3s. Okay. But I also use it for some Wurlitzer and some little bit of strings here and there. On top of that, I have a Korg Cross. It's a small 61 note keyboard, and it's got a sequencer and a lot of beautiful tools that I don't use. I specifically got that because I was missing in the repertoire of sounds I had really, really amazingly luscious strings. And that's so important as a keyboard player, that you've got to have really nice strings. And so so I get pretty much, I use that for all my string sounds, warm, synthy, 8-easy, whatever. And then behind me, I have the Roland Juno 106, which we just talked about. And that's an analog. All those other keyboards are digital. This is an analog keyboard. You can program sounds, but it has all the knobs and levers and all that stuff. So on the fly, you can change the sounds pretty spectacularly. So that's my rig.
That's okay. All right. So before we went live, and so we're going to mix this up a little bit because it's just what I like to do. So I love to ask this question of everybody, especially musicians. So it's a 2-part question. Washington State based, not, you don't get to say out of state, Europe. Sorry, this is got to be Washington State based.
You got it.
Best venue you've ever played at, and best venue you've ever seen a show at.
Wow. See, that's tricky because a lot of these venues are owned by friends of mine. So I'll get myself into trouble. But if I'm being,
you can name, I'll cut you some slack. Give us a couple examples. So you know.
Oh no.
I'll why? I'd like to know why.
Yeah.
From a musician standpoint.
And I'll tell you what, I will, I appreciate the flexibility, but I can listen, every one of these venues, in Tacoma, and we'll stick to Tacoma, like Washington, like you said, Tacoma and Seattle. They all bring different things. But I would say, if I was thinking about it, my favorite venue to play in Washington to date, hands down, would be Jazz Bones. And, a lot of different artists have different reasons why they either love playing there or they don't like playing there. And why I like playing there is because it is set up so beautifully, from the moment you walk in, the bar is right there on the left-hand side. So if you want to walk over there and get a drink, you can. And then if you want to go upstairs, it's right there. You can walk upstairs. So everything is set up really nice. But from an artist standpoint, they always are very artist-centric. They understand artists. They've been around for a long time. I know that they have different ownerships now. And, the owner now is Rachel Hogan, who for the longest time was a bar lead there, bartender and the lead. And so she's been there for a long time and understands. But the feeling there is always they understand artists. They take care of them. They also know when to slap their wrists and, keep them in line. But the stage, the stage isn't really that big, but it's kind of nooked. It's kind of tucked back there in the corner. Even though the sound system is new now, every sound system they've always had it packs a punch. And I like systems like that pack a punch and have, good monitors on stage. And because it's nooked in the corner, the audience is kind of forced, is in line with that stage. But then also, if you look up, there's that upstairs area, the balcony. So me personally, other artists have, they'll maybe say the Swiss or Louis G's or McMenamin's now or the Spanish Ballroom or whatever. I feel when I play at Jazz Bones that it's like playing in a small arena, Because at an arena, right, these guys are on stage and they look out and they see people, and they look up and they see people way out in the rafters, and they can talk to them and whatever in that connection. When you're at Jazz Bones, you can be up there on stage and you're connected with these people right in front of you. And then there's these people over to the right of you, and the people in front of you are intently listening to music, and the people over to the right are maybe, they're drinking and they're talking, and some artists get offended by that. I'm like, no, if I'm their soundtrack for their conversation, that's badass. And then I can look up to the right and look up around, and it's like a small arena. So that is hands down probably my favorite place to play still. And that's why I love playing that place. Even the worst experiences I've had there, are better than some of the, better experiences other places.
All right. How about, so what's a venue that you've seen I'm guessing a lot of your peers play throughout the years? Where's it from the audience side now? Where's it a great place to take in a show, in your opinion, when you're in the audience?
Yeah, let me think about that for a second. I don't want to kill air here. So, playing on stage, and it's a fantastic line of question, Scott, because playing on stage is one perspective. Watching and taking it in is a different perspective. And I would say, and unfortunately, it's no longer around. One of my favorite places to play or to watch a band was Louis G's. And okay. I will say that, the sound wasn't always, ideal. And that's just a personal preference. That's not a knock on the sound guy or anything like that. It's just, my ear, I'm a musician. So unfortunately, my ears are tuned in, but I liked that place because it was bigger and you could kind of walk around and, if you were on overload, sensory overload or whatever, you could go into the very back and just get away from, a little bit, and kind of like being at a concert. If you were enjoying the concert and you're like, I need a beer or whatever, you go out into the hallways and whatever, and you get away from it a little bit. So yeah, I'd probably say of the venues. I mean, and I even like, the Spanish Ballroom, McMenamin's, which is kind of, even though Louis G's is gone, I would say it's now McMenamin's is probably, one of my favorite places to go watch music for the same exact reason. And that's not to take anything away from Jazz Bones or anywhere else. It's just, I like that. I actually like the Tacoma venues more than I like the Seattle venues. I mean, I've done tons of shows and been a judge at the Hard Rock. They've got a beautiful sound system, but it never sounds good. And that just, and it's kind of a box. So it's, people are like, oh, the Hard Rock. And it's like, not so much. Sorry, guys.
What about the triple door? A lot of people like the triple door. Not to put you on the spot. But
no. You can, because we're having an authentic, I mean, if somebody heard this and they could say, well, what does that guy know? I've played at the triple door. Love playing at the triple door. It's a great place to play. I would just say probably the best way I could say it is, for me, the experience of being at the triple door is always great. The tiered seating, the fact you can sit there and have a cup of coffee or a drink and great food or whatever, the theater type of aspect to it. I love that. But the way their sound system is set up, it's only really ideal. There's specific certain types of bands sound great in there and certain bands don't. And that's not a reflection on anything other than the room itself. And it's the same thing. You didn't ask about this, but I just thought of another room because I'm thinking, when you think music venues, sometimes things pop out. But my band Grieve the Astronaut has done 3 shows at a place called the Auburn Avenue Theater, that is actually everything I said about Jazz Bones is still in place, but Auburn Avenue Theater is more of a theater, and that's probably in my entire life, one of the best, most fulfilling shows I've ever done is at the Auburn Avenue Theater because it's a theater. It's not a music, club. It's a theater. It's got, more tiered seating and, lights and movers and all this kind of stuff. Even more so than I've had the opportunity to play in some big stages over the course of my life. Most recently with my wife Jessica Lynn Whitty, who's a country artist. Opening up for Diamond Rio and Larry the Cable Guy, and Jeff Foxworthy, Trace Adkins, on a White River amphitheater size stage, which is super awesome, right? And great.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't feel the connection to the audience and to the room as much as like the Auburn Avenue Theater Jazz Bones we talked about.
So I've never been musically talented. So I've never been on a stage. Well, maybe in 5th grade, I played in a grade school band and probably was, whatever.
I was there.
But you said something.
I had tickets for that concert.
You had tickets for that show. Yes. They're worth a lot. So, but you said something that I'd like to explore a little bit is the connection between the artist and the audience. And you mentioned a White River sized stage versus a Jazz Bone sized stage,
Mm-hmm.
if you will. What is it like as a performer when you're playing in a larger venue where you might not have that intimate connection to the audience like you would at Jazz Bones, where they're literally standing, a few feet in front of you, if you will, or up on the balcony. But if you're playing at something, and we'll just use White River. I don't know if you've ever actually played at that venue, but
I have
been there, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Have you been? You've been there.
I've been
right?
there. I've never played it, but I've been there. I've seen Def Leppard, Journey, all that.
So let's use that venue.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you to imagine that you performed on that stage. How do you prepare differently for venue sizes like that? Or do you just go up there and do your thing and what happens?
Do you mind if I back up for a second?
Please.
So years ago, and now he's a very dear friend. Jessica's bass player is a very well-known local bass player, fiddle, violin player, guy by the name of Lynn Sorensen. And years ago, before we were friends, I interviewed him on my first podcast, The Aquarium, and I asked him a very similar line of questioning, like your favorite place to play, whatever, what's your ideal place to play, and he played with he toured with Paul Rogers and with Bad Company, and he's played Wembley Stadium 4 times, 100,000 people. So I asked him, said, "What's your favorite venue to play? What's your ideal situation?" And so I thought he'd immediately go to Wembley, and he said, "My favorite is when I'm at a club that holds about 100 people, and there's maybe 125, 150 there. So it's packed and people can't move and they're right there in your face." Now, I never really I was like, huh? I don't know how that is, but years later, I understand that. Because to answer your question and answer a question you didn't ask, but just goes that same way, is how do I everyone preps differently. How do I prep? Well, obviously the level of excitement playing a big stage like that is much greater than playing a stage like Jazz Bones, because it's I've made it, that whole what's making it and whatever. It's like, I've made it. I'm on the big stage. I'm the whatever, but and holy Christ, I'm going to play, and blah, blah, blah. And when it comes down to it, when you're not the headliner, you maybe be playing for a couple hundred people where they're playing for, 10,000, because not everybody's quite there yet, whatever. So how I prep for it is the same. I make sure that I have my gear, all the chords, everything like this. I make sure I know where I'm going. I show up on time. The only difference is the level of excitement. But then when it's done, now we fast forward, and like I said, you had your work cut out for you today. I fast forward to a movie that just came out recently called Soul. And I don't know if you've seen that, but it's an animated Pixar type movie.
Oh, I have. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And towards the very end, the guy gets up on stage and he makes it happen. And it's a beautiful thing and great. And when the gig's done, he's sitting out front and the gal's like, "Well, we'll see you here tomorrow night." And he goes, "Oh yeah? Yeah, we're going to do it all over again." And why I bring that up is because I'm trying to keep with my own self here is playing a smaller stage, playing a bigger stage. And it's the perception of what is making it. And for some people, maybe that's it. But most artists I know, the biggest, if you will, making it thing is actually connecting with your fans. And so it made me understand why Lynn said that about, his favorite gig, even though he's played for 100,000 people 4 times is in the smaller club, is because you want that connection. You want the interaction. And what we make, it's all in our heads, what we make anything to be, whether you're playing in front of 10 people or 10,000 people, 100,000 people, it's ultimately really all about connection. So you may prepare for the show the same way. Your perception of what the show is going to be is one thing. When it comes down to it, I've played thousands of shows over my life, and the ones that I remember, why I remember playing with Jessica, with Larry the Cable Guy, is because when we were done playing our set, we got our stuff loaded off the stage. Larry the Cable Guy and Jeff Oxford, they did their sets, and while Diamond Rio was playing, we're on side stage smoking cigars with Larry the Cable. That's not his real name, but with him.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there watching my wife and him for like a half hour, elbow to elbow, like singing, like joking around, like they're singing because they know all the words to every song. And so that's why I remember that. But the performances I remember over the course of my life are all on more smaller, intimate stages where you can actually really see people connecting with what you're doing.
Okay.
That's just me.
But you're doing this for you.
Yeah.
Ultimately, this is your art.
Yep.
It's your art.
Yep.
One of the things that I've seen when I've started looking at your Facebook and your social media and all that, you tend to have a very positive outlook. I'm looking at a photograph right now. It's I don't know who, kind of like cracked plaster, but you're sitting on a, you nod your head. So, but it says, put aside your worry. I can't read.
You deserve it.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm like,
yeah, my graphic.
Where did your positivity come from? Because I've noticed that, and I appreciate this,
and I appreciate you noticing it, man. I know, and I'm being sincere too. I really do, because let me answer your question. because I'm an authentic guy, and don't get me wrong, man. I love to cut up and tell bad jokes and whatever. I don't want to come across as Walt Disney today, but I will tell you that, being 54 and having this life of ups and downs and things that stick with you, that affect you, that you don't realize affect you and stuff. I don't know whether it was how I was, raised, because I was mostly raised by my mom, and my grandmother. And my father wasn't around, that it gave me a different perspective on life. But I have always kind of looked at life a little differently than other people do. And especially with what happened during COVID, because there's an explosion. You're looking at stuff now over the last 6 months. I've amplified my positivity during the COVID thing. It really amplified a lot of what people are going through. And, and so if they're going through negative stuff, it's coming out more. It manifests in different ways. And it did the same thing with me, man. I was self-value, being comfortable in my own skin. Even though I do all this stuff in front of people, I still had that, and it started getting magnified. And then about 6 or so months ago, I got a life coach, a gentleman by the name of Sean Hall. And, we started digging into it, and I said, whatever. And we were able to, uncover at the very core of why I was feeling the way that I was. And because normal life distracts us and it takes our minds off these things, COVID happens. And so now every one of these things is exposed and whatever. And so what it did is, when I was able to realize that the way I thought about life, was there and worked through some of this other stuff, it's amplifying itself into absolute an obliteration of positivity. So every single day I put out a meme, and I do my own graphics with an app I use. It's nothing. I've had some people say, "Who's your graphic designer?" Sometimes they're good. Sometimes you go like, "What is he trying to say there?" But what it is I think where it comes from is this: I am just being who I am. Whether it's goofy, my little Jack things I put out every now and then with the little rabbit telling people to have a good day, or these positive memes or whatever. I'm not thinking, what are other people going to think? I'm just being myself and realizing, and here's the key to it. There's two things why I do it. All this stuff, amplifying and bringing it to the forefront. But most people don't stop to think about their fellow human beings. They just see what's on the surface. The anger, the hatred, you love Trump, you hate Trump, you're racist, you're not racist, this, that, vaccinators, the anti-vaccinators, the maskers, the anti-maskers, all this kind of stuff. That's how most people look at it, because it's simpler, because that's surface. How I see it, and I truly do, I see, every time I see someone post something that is just nasty, or this or that, and they're just stern. Again, not trying to be Walt Disney, I see a person who is hurting. I see a person who lacks insight into their own. I'm not saying that they can't have opinions, and those opinions aren't insightful. But whatever you do, things that you manifest it in a way where you're telling other people that they're a certain way because they don't believe the way you believe. I think a lot of that comes from hurt, and it comes from pain, and from a lack of insight and the willingness to get off their ass and really take a hard look at themselves and go, how can I contribute? And maybe that other person who's being, maybe the reason I'm being nasty, or that other person's being nasty, isn't because they're really nasty. It's because it's easier to spew venom than it is to lift up their fellow human beings. And so the second part of it is, sometimes, Scott, it's a reminder when I start feeling that way, because I'm human too. When I start feeling negative or whatever, it's my way of keeping myself accountable, not only to my fellow human beings out there, but to myself. Because at the end of the day, half the stuff people are arguing about don't mean, in the grand spectrum of things, don't mean shit. So coming back to why I'm this way is because through the coaching, better late than never, I realized over the course of my life, I've looked at myself with imposter syndrome. I'm not as good as these other keyboard players, et cetera, et cetera. I could have spent more time working on being a keyboard player than having a record label and having podcasts and being a judge and blah, blah, blah. And it turns out that no, I was doing exactly what I was supposed to do, because what I am is not a musician. It's a human being who wants to make a difference. That's what I want to do in this life. When I go to my grave, I want people to laugh, cut jokes. I want them to roast, me at a wake, and I want to be known as that guy who made a difference. And so, if putting out a post a day or here and there that puts out some sort of a message, if it resonates with somebody, even a couple people out there, it gets them to think differently, then man, I've had all the success in the world. Who cares if I've been on the White River, amphitheater stage? I've made a difference. I mean, there's, I won't mention his name because I don't want to embarrass him, but there's an artist recently who's connected with me, and he says, "Ray, I want what you have." And he came over and we talked, and I said, "Well, then you're going to have to dig, and you don't want what I have, you want what you have, but you're going to have to dig." And now he's got the same coach as I do. And not that everyone has to have a coach, but I'm just saying you got to dig. And it takes, it's easier to be positive than it's negative, but it takes work.
Well stated.
Long-winded, but
well stated.
Yeah, thanks. That's why I do what I do, man.
That's awesome. Because that was, I was kept noticing this, that you keep posting these things of, and not in a sappy way. I don't, not in a Pollyanna, yeah, but in a very approachable, authentic way.
Cool, thank you.
And so I noticed that. Grieve the Astronaut.
Yes, sir.
let's talk about that.
Okay. What do you want to know, my man?
How'd you get started with this? And I've read some stuff, but I'd like the audience to hear it because they might not be reading like I've read.
Okay.
The name, I was talking to my daughter and I said, I'm going to have this guy on and he's in the band Grieve the Astronaut. And my daughter's, not to put her on the spot because she'll be listening to this, but she's mid-20s.
Okay.
She goes, what a weird name.
Absolutely.
And I go, I don't think it's a weird name. I think there's a story there. And maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're right.
Maybe it's a weird name. Oh, okay, cool. So I was right. Yay me. Listen, Kenzie, I was right. You're wrong. Huh?
Okay, no. I love that Kenzie said weird because if it's weird, it stands out.
Right.
And so
what's the story of this band?
Damn it! It's so hard not to be. I'm gonna try to be as succinct as I can. Okay, this goes back to what I said earlier in just being yourself. Allow you to be yourself. And if something comes in your mind, I'm not saying do everything. I mean, don't be impulsive all the time, but there's a reason I say that. So my wife, I wish I had this beautiful, grandiose story, but it's not. My wife and I were having lunch with her father and stepmother, and they were talking about how they tore their smaller house down to put up a bigger house. And she had this statue, like yard statue of an astronaut. And when they tore the house down, she ended up losing that. And he just matter-of-factly, Scott, he said, yeah, she's been grieving the astronaut ever since. And then he took a bite of his food. And I looked at my wife and I was like, oh my God. And she looks at me and she's like, oh no. I was like, she goes, don't say it. I said, that's a great band name. And so what the hell does that have to do with Grieve the Astronaut? It doesn't have anything to do with it. But what it did was it was so cool. It unlocked something in me that had been wanting to get out. And so Grieve the Astronaut's been around for about 4 to 5 years, been through a couple of different incarnations. But the band it's even though the name came from just kind of a matter of fact thing. Sorry, Kenzie, wish I had a better story for you. But it represents my muse because even though it's a band, it's my vision. And my band are all top-notch musicians. Sid Onshell on bass. We played in bands in the 90s. Eddie Mendoza on drums. Dave Sawyer on guitars. Circa Cherokee and Jessica Lynn Whitty on vocals. Kellis and Knox on keyboards. And then myself on keyboards. They're the ones that bring the sound alive. I write the songs. I have the vision. But it's about, especially the new album, which is called Signs. It's about people opening their eyes to things around them and not ignoring them and actually realizing that these things actually mean something. They're not coincidences. And so the band Grieve the Astronaut is our sound and style is reminiscent of a combination of Pink Floyd and Muse. Piano driven male lead vocal with lots of female backing vocals. By the way, you can find us on grievetheastronaut.com. But the next song we have coming out is called Madness. And so, like I said, this band is about awakening people to see things around them and listen and hear and not talk and not, you're having a conversation with someone and you're not really hearing what they're saying because you have what you want to say in the back of your mind. It's like quieting that and just listening and seeing. And when you do that, you start realizing you're going to find new avenues and doors are going to open up and people like for example, I've opened up more. You've seen that, and now I'm on your podcast. The different things are going to happen. In Madness, the lyrics start out, in the madness, we crawl around, seeking what we can't find, while all the world is blind. And the words we choose will change us. They'll open up our eyes. Anticipate the anger, throw away the lies. And so basically what that's saying is we're all living in the same thing. We're all crawling around. If you will, crawling, those words I think came because it's like a desperate thing, but it is. We're all looking for, like when you're 20 years old, like maybe you've asked your daughter this, Kenzie, what are you going to do with your life? Well, there's this pressure. What are we going to do? And then once you go to college or you do go to trade school or you find something you're going to do, then it's, well, have you got a guy? Or, whether you're heterosexual or homosexual or transgender, whatever. So whatever it is, you have a partner. And then as soon as you have a partner, are you going to have kids? Are you going to adopt kids? Are you going to get a house? You see what I'm saying? It's madness. And so this band, even if we never play the White River Amphitheater, if we can shine a light onto people to open up their eyes, to listen and realize we're all really not that different. Black, white, Asian, male, female, gay, transgender, whatever. We all want the same thing. We want to know, we want to be heard. We want to know what our path is. And this band the music is powerful. It's dynamic. And it's very deep. It's very serious. And when you come to one of our shows, which we won't be doing shows till next year because we're prepping this year for all that. Our main goal is to connect and to get people to walk away and want to listen more. And if we can make a difference in our small part of the world, we've been successful, man. And if we get the White River Amphitheater in the meantime, hey, we'll take it.
Well, let me ask you this question.
All right.
Venue wise for Grieve the Astronaut, in your opinion, where's a venue that would be well suited for what you want to do?
Theaters and big stages. We've already been offered by some local peers of ours to perform at some rock festivals and some club shows. And I've been gracious and said, I appreciate it, love you. If you want me to come in and play keyboards with you for a song, sure. But the band will only do shows at theaters. Like probably our first show back will be the Auburn Avenue Theater. But this is meant. And I don't want to sound cocky, but it's meant for the big stage. Lights.
So it's got a theatrical component to it, if you will?
It's a concept. I mean, okay. It's a concept, there's a multimedia story behind it of a man who realizes where he is in life. And instead of grabbing hold of the things that make his life beautiful, he grabs hold of a technology that allows him to go back in time and warn his younger self to make different choices. And over the course of that, the story unfolds. He realizes that the error of that, and that ties all this music together. So we try to do something because people hear with their eyes, man. That's why concerts are so powerful, because you could hear the music all day long, but you go see them live, like you said earlier about seeing Freddie Mercury. I guarantee you haven't heard Queen the same since.
No, that was, I can, if I kind of like do the whole in my mind's eye, I can remember what the stage looked like. I can't recall the set list with great accuracy. I can probably get pretty close, but that was 1980.
Yeah. Because we hear with our eyes. It's the final step. And so many artists don't understand this. And it's not because they're dumb, or it's more because they're ignorant. And ignorant sounds bad. It just means people don't know. That's all. It's the final dynamic element to any show. You're going to spend all this time writing these songs, rehearsing them, getting the notes down, the dynamics, connecting as a band, and then show up with a t-shirt on. You get, that visual element. I mean, my wife and I were just watching a Pink concert, and the moment she enters that stage to the moment she leaves, she's on fire. She's leaving nothing. And Bono, all these, the greats, Freddie Mercury, like we said earlier. That visual element's important, man. So, yeah.
Well, before we hit record, you were talking about a show you saw at the Gorge, and I told you I was going to ask you to probably have to recount that story. So I'm going to ask you to,
sure,
because this was a band that I wasn't expecting. Yeah, it's not a band that I would expect. Yeah. So can you please share that story?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were talking in the green room before we started, and so I've seen thousands of concerts over the year. Everything from Pink Floyd to Def Leppard to Genesis to Pow to D. Schneider, UFO, God, go on, Van Halen. My favorite concert I've ever gone to was with my wife, was with, for Zach Brown. And like you said, you were shocked. Yeah, so was I. I was like, I was looking forward to going to the concert because we're at the Gorge and we're camping and I'm with my beautiful wife and that's always a great time and blah, blah, blah. I was not expecting to walk away going, okay, that was the best concert I've ever gone to. And that's what we were talking about. The reason it was the best concert, I've had some people go, Zach Brown? And it's not that they don't think he's great, but it's like Zach Brown did something like a lot of these other greats who he just got up there and he was himself. And it wasn't like, he wasn't, I'm sure there was a lot of intention in thinking about the fans and stuff, but he didn't just go up there and just do his own music and stay true to that. He was true to himself. And just like you, and I was shocked at the time, like you were shocked. I was saying Zach Brown was my favorite concert. I think probably, his fans were probably shocked, but fell in love with him even more because even though he writes the kind of music he does, just because like when someone hears a musician play, they may hear him playing rock guitar. Maybe that rock guitar, and they think, oh, they're a Dream Theater fan or they're a Metallica fan. You know what? Maybe they are, but maybe their favorite band is Enya. You don't know. And so Zach Brown, with his style of music, when he gets up there, he gives his audience him. Authenticity pays off in the end, always pays off in the end. And who would have known that he was a Metallica fan and a Guns N' Roses fan and a Queen fan? All great bands. I love all those bands. But, a couple songs in, they did Sandman by Metallica. The midway point of the show, they all came out on the catwalk, sat on stools, and they did Patience by Guns N' Roses. And then at the end of the show, for their encore, the black lights went on the stage. They came out in these black outfits with fluorescent paint on the costumes that made them look like dancing skeletons. And they did Bohemian Rhapsody. And so that was why it was and it taught me something well. It's like, you have to focus on what's true to your audience. I know my wife, Jessica Lynn Whitty, she always, when she's working on her show and songs, I hear her talk about it to me and to her bandmates. Yeah, but we need to think about our audience. So being intentional to your audience, being authentic to yourself, it sounds complicated. It's like, no, just be yourself. While you're being yourself, think, okay, well, maybe a little bit of this part of myself is a bit too much for my audience, whatever. But, we had this conversation around the fire last night. A little polarization every once in a while is not a bad thing, and stepping over that line and pushing, like my wife is obviously a country artist. And, so, some of the cover songs that they do, like, it wouldn't be a stretch if I told you, well, they do The Chain by Fleetwood Mac. That probably would what you'd be, oh yeah, well, I could see that country band, whatever. But she just added a new song to her set, Hit Me With Your Best Shot by Pat Benatar.
That one had me go,
Yeah, exactly. And it made me kind of go, as well, until I heard them play it. And they countrified it, and they're just being themselves, and they're just having fun. And they're saying, you know what? Screw it. We love this song. And if we love it, that love's going to be expressed through the way that we put it together. And it was. And now they're talking about other songs like, they're talking about doing a Stones song. I think, we're talking about maybe doing Thunderstruck by AC/DC. And it's kind of that same thing goes back to why my favorite concert was Zach Brown, because if you're just yourself, and then think a little, you definitely got to think about your fan base, but just being yourself, just being true, it's too much work to try to be somebody else. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. So you also perform in another band, right?
I do.
Yeah. So why don't we talk about that?
Sure. Strangely All Right. We've been together for probably 6 or 7 years. It's the brainchild of Regan Lane, who is a local guy, local music royalty. He was the lead singer of the Stripes back in the day. And so Regan Lane is on lead vocals and primary songwriter. Sean Van Domelen is the lead guitar player. Jason Bear is the drummer. Ken Schaff is the bass player. And then I'm the keyboard player. It originally started out with us doing all of Regan's music. But the band over the last couple of years has morphed into doing music by both Regan Lane and also Sean Van Domelen. And they're also the producer and engineer for everything we record. We do in our own studio. And it's just it's a misfit. We're a bunch of misfits. Everyone in the band is in some sort of recovery for either diabetes like myself, or drugs or alcohol, or whatever. And that goes into the way we connect with the audience and the way that we perform as brothers. And our lead singer is an amazing front man. And it's just such a great band because people aren't gonna, they're just strangely all right, because we're just, you couldn't have picked 5 different guys, and yet we get together in a band. And I mean, this last year we released some singles: Inside a Place, Psych Film, Alien Lover, and these are like 8-minute songs. Scott, it's like asking me a question. It takes 8 minutes, right? But anyway, but check it out, strangelright.com. It's a muse of, I mean, it was a lot poppier beforehand. It was way more when our previous EP came out a couple years ago called Stuff. It was more poppy. Cheap Trick meets the Beatles meets David Bowie. And now it's more, David Bowie meets the Beatles meets Pink Floyd.
Okay.
So, but yeah, that's it. So those are my 2 main bands: Grieve the Astronaut and Strangely All Right.
And I think both of those names are awesome. They're Strangely All Right. There's something about that name that I chuckle. And you guys were doing a YouTube show for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And your first episode featured another Tacoma artist, he grew up in Tacoma, but he called himself a Seattle artist. We'll make fun of him.
We will.
Yes, that'd be kind of fun. No, but that was kind of my introduction to you, was because he said, "Hey, did you check this out?" And it was because it's been a couple of years since you guys did that, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Wasn't that like
3? Yeah, it's 3 years, something like that.
Yeah, and anyway, I thought that was kind of at first I thought it was the name of the show. I didn't know there was a band attached to it.
The band came first.
Yeah, but the show idea, Strangely All Right, kind of reminded me of the show kind of when I was in college. Local show was Almost Live. Somehow I connect Almost Live and Strangely All Right in my brain. They connect. I don't know why. There is no connection. But
maybe it's the local connection, kind of thing. And because I was a big fan of Almost Live, and then when it became the 206, same thing. Right. Pat and Chris Cashman. Strangely All Right TV. Yes, and that's how you and I are connected initially, is because our first guest was Michael Wansley, aka the Wands, from the Macklemore camp, and he's good people. And Michael and I met in 1996. I was in a band called Bad Flowers and a band called the Ghetto Monks. We shared a drummer, but we also shared a rehearsal pad in Seattle at a shitty little room that didn't even have heat in it, and it was terrible. But yeah, his band, the Ghetto Monks, and my band, Bad Flowers, were playing in the Seattle area and getting some success and having good. And he was a rock singer, funk, and then years later, Macklemore was blowing up, and I was playing with this young kid named Nolan Garrett and managing him. And we went to this studio in Federway or Auburn. I can't remember where it was, Scott, but they said, the Wands is going to be there. And Nolan's like, I'd love to meet him. I'm like, okay, I'll put it together. Now, mind you, I didn't put 2 and 2 together. I didn't realize the Wands was Michael Wansley, because I knew Michael Wansley as a funk rock singer. So we get there and we walk in and they say, Wansley, he's in the back. They're just giving him a tour right now. And so he comes walking down the hallway, and I look at him and I'm like, Michael Wansley? And he looks at me and he goes, and I remembered him And he looked at me, he kind of had that like, okay, why do I know you? But I didn't have a beard back in the day.
Okay.
And I had longer hair. So he was like, and I said, Raymond Hayden, Bad Flowers. And he's like, oh my God. And then I was like, oh my God, you're the Wands? He's like, Michael Wansley? I'm like, oh my. And I felt like an idiot because, when I knew of Michael Wansley was, this guy who, he's always a hip dresser, but he wasn't wearing suits, and he was, and I can't remember if people called him Wands or not back then. I think maybe they did, but that was 1996. So I didn't put two and two together. And of course, I eventually lived that down, but anyway.
I met him in 1980.
Wow.
He was playing in a band called Central Connection. And they were a Earth, Wind and Fire-esque band.
Oh, nice.
And they were playing at Central Washington. Well, they were all from Central Washington University, right?
Right.
And so they had the matching outfits and all that. And that's, so I've known him since 1980.
Well, didn't you say you guys were you guys college roommates?
We were college roommates. And then, there's more, but that's enough for this show. But before we wrap this up, I'd like to touch on your podcast because you've been podcasting for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you tell us about your show and where people can find you and things like that? Sure.
No, and I appreciate that. So my podcast is called Houston. We have a program. It was named by my wife. And of course, the height of, having grieved the astronaut, everything's spacey, right?
Right.
And so the platform we use to record on is Squadcast, just like you are. The host is Seattle Wave Radio, Mark and Linda Gordon, who are very dear friends of mine and have an online radio program, Seattle Wave Radio. So if you go to seattlewaveradio.com and you go to the podcast section, you'll see Houston episode 1 or 2. Or if you go to my website, raymondhayden.net, you can also go to the podcast section. I'm there. So Houston, I had a podcast years ago on NWCZ radio called The Aquarium. And it was very similar to what it is now. And that is I wanted to bring artists on there, but give people make them feel like they're in the same room, just like you're doing with me. Very relaxed, comfortable conversation, hear with their music and just, again, be myself, so I only have, so on the Aquarium, maybe did 160 episodes. On Houston, we've only done about 30 so far. But we've interviewed everyone from the guitar player from Autograph, Steve Lynch, to European Grammy winning saxophone player Paul Sautel lately, the guys up at London Bridge, Jeff Ott. Earlier this year, last year we interviewed Rachel Flowers, who's a progressive rock keyboard player. We interviewed Car Park North. The most recent interview we did was with the keyboard player for Europe, which him and I had a relationship back in the 80s. But if you turn into the podcast, you'll check it out. But so he's a keyboard player for Europe, and they're normally about 45 minutes to an hour long, and we just have a conversation like we're sitting in a room on a couch, and you're invited, and we play their music. And we put in some corny bumpers, and it's very professionally produced by the owner of Seattle Wave Radio. And yeah, it's called Houston. And I do it because, back to what I said earlier on in my long-winded explanations, my mission, my reason for being here is connection. And so if I can reach out and connect with these artists that I respect and admire and share them with my audience, all kinds of connections start happening. And to give you a real quick example of that is the interview I did before that was with a band called Car Park North. And they're one of Denmark's biggest bands. And if you haven't heard of them out there, check them out. Car Park North. They're amazing electronic pop, rock band. And so the lead singer, Lau, I had no idea, but when Europe's management company and I were going back and forth negotiating for about 6 months to get Mick on the show. He had listened to a little bit of the show and made a nice comment about Car Park North. And so after our interview, I emailed the lead singer Lau of Car Park North, and I said, "Hey, just so you know," I said, make sure you tune in later this week. I said, I've got Europe, the keyboard player for Europe on here. And by the way, he had some nice things to say about your band. Not on air, he didn't, but in the green room, he did.
Right.
Just that's what I do. I don't no rock unturned, and let you tell everybody. If someone says something nice about somebody, you call them, you email, you text me, let them know. You never know how it could change their day. I get an email back the next day from Lau saying, "Oh my God," like a little school kid. He's like, "Oh my God." He's like, "You have no idea how much that meant to me. Europe was a huge inspiration for me." And so back to that connection thing. I'm not trying to pat myself on the shoulder. I'm just saying I do what I do. I love it. It's not work because it's just fun, but that's where that podcast fits into my realm, is just another way to connect with people.
In the green room, you mentioned we wanted to talk about, and awkwardly bringing this up, but community.
Oh, there's nothing awkward about that. Yeah.
Well, I kind of wanted to like weave it in,
but sure.
So weaving it in carefully. No.
Yes. Well, I feel bad for your producer. He's gonna be like, "Oh my God," he's gonna have to like.
No, he doesn't clean up much. And seriously, this is not going to get cleaned up a whole lot. We're not produced like you are.
Oh no. Well, hey man, we're all different. If we're all the same, it would be boring.
Right.
So community is one of the most powerful things. No matter what you're doing in life, whether you're a stockbroker or you're an electrician or you're a teacher or whatever, community to support each other in a community allows you to connect with people and to commiserate and to support and lift up when those need lift up and when they need a light shined on them. And in the music community, especially because it's such a objective or subjective thing. I mean, there's so many different genres, and Tacoma's got a huge hip hop, niche and a rock niche and whatever. And community is what drives everything, because what artists really need is to connect with their fans. But by connecting with their peers and their community, you're able to learn from one another. And the things that are tough about this industry, which we don't need to get into today, you can commiserate and you can come up with ideas to overcome those and go through those. If you look back to the 90s, when there was the proliferation of grunge acts and whatever, and if you're involved in that, which we weren't a grunge band, we were a horn band at the time. So go figure, we didn't have any success at that time. But those bands, they supported each other. If they weren't playing, they'd come out and see them. They'd tell their fans to go support them. And there was this community. It's not about competition. It's about community and lifting each other up and giving each other a hard time. But if a band comes out and says, "Hey, we hit, we just sold, we just sold out a 10,000 seat arena." You could be another band going, "God, I want that." Well, and then maybe you're, your self-esteem or your envy takes over, and you look at that as competition. And no, it's like, no, you first of all reach out and tell them, "Hey, good job," and then say, "Hey, would you be open to going out and have a beer on me? I'd love to hear how you got to this place." That's community. Not, but don't get me wrong, it's not. It's also about being, real people and friendship. Whatever. I'm not advocating, hey, if you see someone doing something and having success, call out to them, reach out to them, do whatever. It's like, hey, how about call up and start with, "Hey, how are you doing today?" And meaning it, and then shutting the hell up and letting them tell you. And hey, if the conversation that day goes to, "Let's get together and have a beer," and maybe the only thing you do is just talk, and maybe his kid is having trouble in school or whatever. But coming back to that community thing, it's what wraps everything up. And without community, you might as well wrap it up, because community. Another word for community is family. Another word for family is tribe, and all those are very, very powerful words. And it brings it all together. It makes it so worth it, because at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? Why are you having a podcast? To connect with your guests, to connect with your audience. And so I appreciate you bringing that up, because that is probably one of the most powerful, one of the most important things to me in my life, is community.
Okay. I'm going to wrap this up with a couple of easy questions.
Uh-oh. Great.
It's easy for me to ask, hard for you to answer.
All right.
Okay. Are you a coffee fan?
Love coffee. Yes.
Okay. So not putting you on the spot like I did with your favorite venue, because like you may know people that own coffee shops, but in the Tacoma area, where do you go for coffee?
Anthem.
Okay.
Anthem
Which one?
coffee. I either go to the one at Union Station. See, you're like, hey, I'm going to trick this guy. I'm going to find out if he's serious. No, I'm kidding. No, Anthem. So I do little adventures with friends of mine a couple times during the week, and we go out and walk. And so my favorite two Anthems are number one, the one downtown in Pacific and the Union Station. It's super cool. You can go down there, get yourself a cup of coffee. They're always friendly and helpful. And then you can walk across the bridge and see the Chihuly art and go over and see, around the Glass Museum and the waterfront, Theophos Waterway. And then the other one, which I did this morning, actually, with my friend Naomi, is the Anthem in Puyallup. And so we'll go down to Puyallup, sit there, get a cup of Joe. Oh, again, very sweet. And then walk around Puyallup. And the coffee's great.
I always am surprised when I go into one of their locations. I don't know if they have more than those two. So if there's a third or fourth one, I don't.
Okay. They do. There's more than those two.
But I've been to both of the ones you mentioned, the Puyallup one especially.
Yep.
And it's almost like I feel like I'm walking into, the old TV show Cheers. I mean, it's like, hey, and they're just gregarious and outgoing. And it's got a great atmosphere.
And it has a very eclectic, it's weird. I mean, I guess most coffee shops do, but for whatever reason, I've really noticed a very, very eclectic patronage there. I mean, this morning there was a couple gals there with their babies, and people were, the girls were oogling over them, and then over to the right were two Korea area veterans, old timers just sitting over there, and I like that. It's not just like, you don't just walk in as a bunch of, 20 somethings. Sorry, Kenzie.
Yeah. Well, okay. The other question is, when you're not doing music in the Tacoma area, what do you like to do for fun? What you've already kind of said, you walk across the bridge looking at the Chihuly art, which is amazing. Theophos Waterway is awesome, all that. But what else is there for you in Tacoma?
It would have been easier to answer a year ago, right? For obvious reasons with the pandemic and stuff like this. If I just, without even thinking about it, I would say right off the bat, there's a huge cigar population, people who smoke cigars. And so whether it's the Thunderbird or it's Smokey Joe's and BJ's, like going there and grabbing a good cigar and a whiskey with friends, because you just have great conversation and laughing. Another thing would be probably my wife and I's two favorite places to go to eat would be Marzano's in Parkland, Italian restaurant. It's a house that was many years ago, 20 plus years ago, retrofitted into an Italian restaurant. Little pricey, but it's worth every penny. That's Marzano's. And then we like to do the happy hour at El Gaucho because we can afford that, and it's dark and dreary, and that's right now. And the comedy club too, but again with the pandemic thing, it's kind of redefined what we do in Tacoma.
Now, do you really want to go on record saying El Gaucho is dark and dreary?
Well, not dreary, maybe. Yeah, okay, dark and dreary is probably not the way. Dark and what's the word I'm looking for? You feel like you're in an old Rat Pack movie.
Oh, I'm that's the vibe that they have there. Yeah.
Yeah. Dreary is not the right word. Thank you for thank you for getting that. Yeah.
We're going to leave that in, but
okay. I'm going to get your prices just went up.
Yeah.
But just man, in the older I get, the simpler it is. I mean, my favorite thing to do, whether it's in Tacoma or in Palm Springs, when my wife and I went there recently, or when we go to do shows in Copenhagen where her family's from, because my wife's Danish American. The same thing. It all comes back to just sitting down, either having coffee or having whiskey or a cigar or whatever, and just talking and about nothing. It's like it's like Seinfeld, right? It's a show about nothing. That's my life, man.
Life about nothing.
Although you wouldn't know that because you haven't been able to shut me up. But anyway.
Oh my gosh. I love it. We'll put some show notes at the bottom, but why don't you close this out by telling people where they can find you online and all your projects, because you're pretty prolific and people should check you out.
Well, I appreciate that, Scott, and sincerely, man, I've really had a good time, and you make me you just been one more sign, if you will, to agree with the astronaut thing that that this being authentic thing, it's paying off, because I wouldn't have got to meet you ahead of time, and we'll have to have a copy at Anthem one of these days.
Yes.
But so how people can find out about me is just recently, because my wife created, I had a couple different websites, but if you go to RaymondHayden.net, that's RaymondNet, you'll be able to find everything I do. It's all listed there, whether it's podcasts or projects with the bands we've been talking about me, if you want to find out about me for whatever reason. I have a blog, which I just started, but everything's there, RaymondHayden.net. Of course, you can find me on Facebook. I have a personal page and an artist page, but the bands and everything I do is under RaymondHayden.net. Simple. I wanted to keep it simple so it wouldn't be a stretch for people to have to keep going around. And I've had a good time, man. Thanks for having me on your podcast and letting me talk.
Well, I appreciate you. This has been a lot of fun for me, and let's do this again.
Yeah, let's do it. How about this? Let me throw it this way. I've never, in the entire time I've ever been doing my own podcast, I've never had another podcaster on. So why don't I return the favor and have you on my podcast, and let's talk about what you've done and some of your favorite guests and whatever. I mean, seriously, it's really, it'd be cool to kind of get what's it like being a podcaster. I mean, there's so many podcasters, just like there's so many musicians out there. There's so many podcasters. Let's dig into that. Is that cool?
I'd love that.
All right, we're gonna love that chance. We're on, brother.
Awesome.
We're on.
All right.
Join us next time for another episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast.